and Founder podcast. I'm your host, Daniella, an emergency medicine resident doctor. Taking behind the scenes as I'm building my own startup. And on the podcast, I also love to introduce and bring on amazing guests who are physicians building amazing things outside of medicine, whether it's in entrepreneurship, content creation, music, and etc. And on today's episode, I'm very thankful to be having a conversation with Dr. Elizabeth Clayborne, a physician, founder, and CEO of Nasaclip that we'll discuss a little bit more about. And she's also a mother. So Dr. Clayborne, I want to say thank you so much for being a part of the Resident Founder podcast.
Thank you for having me, Daniella. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So I think first, Dr. Clayborne is talking a little bit about your journey to medicine, particularly getting into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I would say it's a completely unexpected, abrupt turn in my career path. I had already a convoluted path to medicine. I went to Duke for undergrad and did a non-science major in medical ethics and religion. Had this kind of early interest in ethics, religion, health policy. Then did 2 years at NIH doing research on race, ethnicity, and genetics before I went to medical school. Went to Case for med school and did a dual degree, both MD and a master's in bioethics. So kind of bringing full circle that, ethics policy kind of interest. And then I did my residency at GW, which I really chose because I loved the DC area. And then also it was really a strong program that could set me up for an academic career focused on health policy, disparities, end of life care, and other ethics issues. However, in my 4th year of residency, I was really struck by the number of people who came to the ER for nosebleeds. We see about 500,000 ER visits a year. It's about 0.5% of visits. So like 1 in 200 people walking into an ER urgent care is for epistaxis or nosebleeds. And all those EM people out there know how much we love nosebleeds when they show up, right? It's literally our most favorite complaint to deal with. And so I just couldn't understand when I was in training why so many people came to the hospital for such a simple problem. I was just like, just put pressure on your nose. Like, what's the big deal? But when I looked at it more carefully, I realized that patients were coming in usually because they did the opposite of what they were supposed to do. So they would put their heads back instead of forward. They would pinch on their nasal bridge instead of over the flare of their nostril. And then most importantly, they didn't hold constant pressure. So as you know, they come in and we're like, pinch your nose, hold your nose, don't let go for 10 to 20 minutes. But that's hard to do. Like nobody's pinching their nose for 10 to 20 minutes without, letting go a little bit. And then if you look at the demographics or who makes up the incidence of nosebleeds, it's most common in kids 2 to 10 and older adults 55 to 80, especially if they're anticoagulated. So it's like the least likely population to be able to manage that well. So in training, what I was taught to do is to take 2 tongue depressors and tape them together to like make a clip, right? Which is what we do in emergency medicine, right? We just MacGyver things together and make it work. To me, I was like, that's absurd. Like, how is there not a device for this? I'm like, these patients don't even need to be here. We discharge over 90% of epistaxis, which is usually an indication that if they had something to treat at home, they wouldn't be there. And so when I really started thinking about it, I was like, there should be a device for this. And so it was just that curiosity that kind of led me to explore. And I ended up in my 4th year applying to the business plan competition with the mentorship of one of my attendings, and ended up, finalizing or getting in the finals for that competition, won a little prize money. And that's really kind of what started my initial trajectory into being this physician innovator. Now, I will say that it didn't happen contiguously. Like there were a lot of interruptions, and happy to discuss with you, but it was a like one-off idea that I had. But like every time I would have a nosebleed patient, I was like, man, I really got to get this thing to market because it just made so much sense. And now if you see the product, which you can go check out on nasaclip.com or Amazon, because it is actually over the counter. It is, such a simple solution to a common problem that was like kind of one of those examples of things that are in our face all the times as physicians. And it just took me really thinking like, well, I don't need to tape together tongue depressors. I can come up with a better solution.
That's absolutely amazing. And I totally agree. Like it is a big problem, especially in the ED. Obviously, I'm still in my intern year, but I've still had a handful of nosebleeds, and they can be a pain in the butt of telling people of like, hey, like pinch that nose forward. And I also have done the thing where you take 2 tongue depressors and put some tape on it really tight and just hold it there. That's usually what my attendings tell me to do. And so when I kind of stumble across your content, particularly on Nasaclip, I'm like, this makes a lot of sense. Once again, just a device that you put there. And you mentioned like you thought about this and obviously in your 4th year of residency. So once you came up with the idea, how did that process go? Like I know you mentioned like you obviously were part of this business accelerator, but like taking the concept of an idea to the actual product itself, how did that look like for you?
Right. And this is where I think most physicians get hung up, right? It's like they have an idea, and then because we're not trained, right? We don't have podcasts like this, we don't have education about innovation or entrepreneurship. It just doesn't go anywhere because, I had no business background, no business training, and you're busy. I was like, basically graduating, becoming a new attending. I had taken a faculty position at the University of Maryland, and I didn't really have time or the know-how of like how to like bring it to market. But one thing I did do because we did the business plan competition is I filed my patents. So I had, a provisional patent filed before the business plan competition because we were going to show kind of the artwork or what I pictured the device to look like in my head. And then from there, I did in my early years as an attending kind of keep it on the back burner, but I did get my patents done, which is really helpful. So anytime you have an idea, the first steps I always tell people to do is number one, protect your IP. Like if you don't have intellectual property, like your company will have no value because there's no moat around your idea and other people can just copy it. Before you do that, you're going to verify that it is indeed unique and novel and protectable. And so that's the first step. The second step I would say is that you need to make sure you have good product market fit and that people would actually pay money for something before you like pour your blood, sweat, and tears into doing that. And so the way that you can do that is really making sure you have good customer discovery. So for me, because I started getting involved with the community from the business plan competition, I stumbled into doing the iCore program or the Innovation Core program. And we did both a local one in the DMV area. And then I went on to do the National Science Foundation national one, which came with some grant money. And really the focus of these programs are to have interviews done with the actual users. So for us, we went out and we talked to, parents, trainers, coaches, pharmacists, doctors, nurses, and we asked like, well, how do you treat nosebleeds? Why do you do that? Who told you to do that? Where does that come from? Would you do something different if this was available? Like, would you use it? Like, what would you pay for it? And it just really helps you vet that like you have a actual solution to a problem that people are going to be willing to, pay some hard cold cash for. And so I thought that was a really essential, really fortuitous step that I took because a lot of missteps can happen when, you get really attached to your baby and your idea. I would say the negative stereotypes of physician innovators is that, and I think this comes more from surgeons, in my opinion, is that they have God complexes and they're not coachable and you can't get them to change anything they do. For me, I had no business background, so I was very malleable, very willing to absorb, content and a strategy when it came to designing the device and getting it to market from people because I just knew it was not my forte. I just knew I clinically understood what was needed to stop a nosebleed effectively. So I did do some, the iCore program, but I didn't really take like action on the device until 2020. And as you guys know, that was pandemic times. So it was a really kind of interesting story because I was about 6 months pregnant during the pandemic with my second kid. I was working at PG County Hospital just outside of DC, which was like the hardest hit hospital in the state of Maryland. And there were two other pregnant providers like in my group. And so I ended up doing a lot of national media during COVID because I just think I stumbled into a local radio, or I was actually a television segment talking about what it was like to be pregnant on the front lines. And they found out I had a knack at doing live television. And I'm telling this story because it really set me up to be able to pitch eventually and to like be able to fundraise effectively, which is another thing that I think is really important to have. Or if you can't do it, you got to have someone on your team who's like really clear about articulating what your device does, its value add, and like who is going to be interested in using it. And so I did all this national media, delivered my second kid May 30th, 2020. And during my maternity leave, after working pregnant on the front lines, I did my first accelerator program for Nasaclip. And part of the reason I did it at that time is they required for the accelerator that you be full time with the company, which brings up some of the very, I think, difficult challenges that you have being either a physician, a woman, or a mother when trying to pursue this type of journey. Because I think that historically this has just been a niche where startups, they assume they're like trust fund babies in college that can go ahead and not have a job and be full time with a startup that's not paying them any money, which is not the reality for a lot of people. So for me to mitigate that, I did it. I breastfed my newborn baby. It was like virtual because of COVID. I got my first 50,000 infusion in capital, but more importantly, they did give me a lot of good strategic advisors that kind of stayed on. And it was like at that point where I was like, okay, I really feel like I have something with teeth here and I need to invest some time in making it happen. So from that point, I steadily started bringing down my clinical hours. And then I went full time with the company in 2023. and we launched on our website and in our B2B sales in late 2023, early 2024. And to date, I've raised about 4.5 million for the company. And it's been a huge success so far. It does feel like a roller coaster ride. I mean, one of the biggest challenges I'm having now is we cannot build the device fast enough to keep Amazon stocked, which is a great problem to have. But all of the tiny steps I had to take with deciding to do this was really this decision, like, am I going to step away from my very safe, predictable path of academic emergency medicine and take a pretty substantial risk in something that is completely unknown? But I think if you hear, from my history of doing a non-science major and, kind of doing a dual degree in bioethics, I've always been someone that's willing to take risks. And I've learned in my professional, career that, like, when you do that, it usually pays dividends. And I think Nasaclip is a prime example of that. Just to clarify, because I always have to make sure I do this, because you guys cannot see me, what our device does is it provides adjustable external compression, and then it has intranasal sponges that can be medicated. So what I wanted to do is, if you come to the ER, I know you spray Afrin up the nose and then you pinch on the nose. And I wanted something that could do both. And so I thought the reason kids and older adults didn't tolerate our interventions for nosebleeds well is because it's uncomfortable to stuff things up the nose. They hate being packed. So you really want to avoid having to use a nasal tamponade device if you can, like a rabbit rhino. And so I wanted something that was a first line, intervention that anyone could use that would stop the nosebleed right when it started. So you didn't create more damage to that nasal mucosa. And, like, a couple hours later, now they're in the ER and they, like, have created more of a problem than initially existed. So our device has adult and pediatric sizes. It has soft medical grade sponges, which are really designed to carry vasoconstrictive or hemostatic agents. You can put whatever you want on it. If you want to throw TXA on there, you can, but I generally encourage people to use Afrin because in the ED setting, that way it could be applied in triage by a nurse or a tech. You can have a standing order for Afrin. You apply the device, and by the time they come back to see you, you're just removing it and checking for bleeding. By that time, it's usually stopped. And then we send them home with a to-go device because it is over the counter. So it's a win-win-win in the hospital setting because the patient gets initiated treatment much faster. You use less of the doc's time. You usually can discharge them a lot more quickly, and then they're less likely to bounce back. And all of these things obviously elevate patient and provider satisfaction. And for me, it makes nosebleeds, like, so much less painful.
No, that's
So
amazing. And
that's
I
like
think,
the
yeah.
that's the value add. But yeah, in the beginning, um, I just really had it in the back of my mind as something I wanted to pursue, but it really took doing that accelerator program for me to decide, like, okay, I'm going to really go ahead and dedicate time and money to this. And I'm happy to talk about, the fundraising and the actual physical production of the product.
That's all great. And I think there's a lot of gems there. I think going back to the mentorship piece, right? Because obviously you had like these accelerated programs, but even when you started having the idea of, I want to make something, and obviously you probably didn't even have the name Nasaclip in mind per se, but just have the idea of what you want to do. Did you have any specific mentors, particularly in the physician world? I know, like, obviously once you got to the accelerators, you obviously have more business mentors and connections there. But was anybody on the physician side of things, especially as a resident, that you were able to turn to for mentorship and guiding you?
Yeah, I was really fortunate at GW. My attending, Dr. Neil Sicca, had been working with the GW Innovation Center. And so he was that link for me as a resident with an idea to connect both to the business plan competition. And then he also introduced me to my co founder, or what would be my co founder, Ramil Patel, who was in undergrad at the time in biomedical engineering. So I basically came to him with the idea, and he's like, okay, well, I think you should apply for this business plan competition. They're going to, give you some curriculum. They also connected me to the Office of Technology Transfer, OTT. So most academic institutions will have an OTT, and they are the ones who can help get you all the legal stuff, other resources for kind of building your innovation. And so, Neil ended up being a co-founder, so he has a minority, you know, um, percentage of ownership in the company, but he was one of my initial mentors that was a physician, and he had actually mentored another resident that I was in training with who had an IV device. And so I felt really fortunate that there was someone like that at my institution. That is not always the case, but I would say all institutions do have, some kind of innovation center. It may not be attached to the School of Medicine, but it'll be broadly attached to the academic center and then the Office of Technology Transfer. The other caveat I will share is that my patents were able to be assigned to my company and not to the hospital or the academic institution because I was a resident when I came up with it. So if you're a faculty member, the university has rights to your intellectual property if you come up with something. So you should always keep that in mind because it does have consequences in the long run that can be both positive and negative. I mean, for me, I think the positive is that because I wasn't a faculty member and I was a resident, and residents are paid through Medicare, the hospital or the academic institution does not have rights to the intellectual property that I came up with during training, which means those patents were all assigned to the company that I established. Now, if you're a faculty member, it's a different story, but that also means that the academic center is usually going to assist you in the development and give you money, access, a lot of things to kind of move that ball down the court, which you may not have access to as a resident. So I just always bring that up because people always ask me this, and it's something that comes into play when you're raising funds, especially if you get venture backed down the line.
No, great. And I think I'm really glad that you actually brought it up because my next part was kind of delving a little bit more into the intellectual property side of things. So you obviously mentioned that you started with the patent first. Can we talk a little bit more about that process for you and also like other things that maybe physicians in general, whether it's a device or just building a company to be mindful of, whether it's trademarking, copyrights, whatever that looks like?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of infrastructure up front where it really is helpful if you're doing things correctly the first time, because if you miss stuff and have to go back once you've gone down the road a little bit, it's very expensive and challenging to clean up. So you do want to establish a business. Initially, I did an LLC, and that was the kind of entity that all of our patents were assigned to. When you're filing a patent, you'll do a provisional patent first, and then file for a full patent. It also you can file for something called a PCT, which gives you access to do international patents in a certain period of time. Filing for patents is super expensive. So it is one of the first things that you're either going to have to come out of pocket for or you're going to have to pay for. And we did do a lot of kind of non-dilutive funding grants and stuff, but a lot of times those cannot be used for your patents, even though it's like one of the first things you need to do. You also need to have like some kind of structure to your company, your organization, as far as like how the equity is being divided if there's more than one person involved, and you need to be really clear on that from the beginning. I think I've been fortunate in that Ramil is like a dream co-founder for me. We basically have now had a 10-year relationship or marriage in Nasaclip. And we really are very yin and yang because he's like an engineer and I'm like the innovator, creative, spokesperson of the company. And he's our CFO and helps me with all the numbers. But I have heard horror stories about things that have gone left with co-founders. And if you don't have those initial legal documents set up correctly as to how someone exits, what they get if they exit, how long they need to vest, all of those things, then you're going to be in trouble. So I do think it's helpful to get corporate counsel early on in helping to structure your company and kind of understand those ground rules and to kind of assist with fundraising when you get into more advanced rounds. So I think that, lawyers have to get involved early on, both on the IP front and on the corporate front, but it's kind of a necessary evil to make sure you're doing things correctly, and it will alleviate a lot of potential headaches in the future.
No, that's great. And I think the next thing too is obviously now that you had like built this infrastructure is the funding piece, which is obviously the big piece. And like you just mentioned, you raised a lot of money for Nasaclip. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that in terms of that journey of going about fundraising and also identifying barriers to fundraising. Because for one, you're a woman and there's a lot of statistics around that. And then secondly, as a person of color and a lot of unfortunately money not being given to women of color kind of stepping into this field.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel really strongly about this. And one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about Nasaclip now is when I got into this, I had no idea of the disparity of basically funding dollars that goes to women and especially women of color. So we currently give only 2.4% of venture capital to women. Period, which is like outlandish. It's billions and billions of dollars that go into investing in startup companies. Under 3% of that is going to women. Black women get 0.34% of that. It's like a negligible amount. And what I find is interesting is that venture capitalists will always say that they're about their dollar, they're about their paper, they make their money, they're very risk adverse. But it's statistically, if you look at exits and just how companies do, Black female founded companies and female founded companies are actually outpacing all white male companies all the time. We tend to be faster to revenue, faster to profitability. We can bring in 6x greater returns. So to me, I just didn't understand why it was so challenging for me to raise. And, but that was my experience. Like I would come in trying to raise capital and I'm patent issued, trademarked, revenue generating. You know what I mean? I got academic pedigree. You know what I mean? Clinician, like check, 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 still struggling to raise capital. So I think that my personal opinion is that there's an unconscious bias that exists just because a lot of venture capitalists are white men, and they're usually going to do something that they're comfortable with. And so it's who they know that they're comfortable with. Apologies. I put this on do not disturb. Um, so it's who they know that they're comfortable with. And uh, I think that they, are not as familiar, and therefore think it's maybe more risky to invest in someone who they just maybe don't identify as well with. And so I think that's why I'm really striving to ensure that I can have a monumental $1 billion exit to really show how far we can go. And then it also will position me as someone who can invest in other women and people of color once I've had that exit. So in the beginning, though, when you're first starting to raise, because this is the other, I think, stumbling block for physicians when they kind of start looking at how they're going to be able to fund their endeavor, you usually start with like what they call a friends and family round, which again is very challenging if you come from backgrounds where your friends and family are not in a position to invest. Now, fortunately, physicians have physicians to invest. And in order to be an angel investor or kind of do, usually use a vehicle like a safe note or a convertible note in those early rounds. The reason that's done is because your company doesn't have enough progress to be able to put an evaluation on like how much it's worth or evaluation on the company. So you use these vehicles where people are basically investing in debt that will convert to equity when you have a qualifying round. And so that's what I did. I did 2 different convertible notes, and I collected mostly like $5,000 checks, a lot of them from my colleagues. But in order for you to be an angel investor, you have to be an accredited investor, which is, basically characterized by our government as meeting like certain economic metrics that allow you to invest in that way. And there's specifically that you, as an individual, you need to make 250,000, a couple $300,000 a year, or have a net worth of $1 million, excluding your home. So a lot of physicians are in a position where like they meet that criteria, but like a lot of your other people might not. And so, trying to raise, and I raised about 1.1 million in my first round, like trying to raise 1.1 million from $5,000 checks is still a challenge. So it was a little bit of a snowball effect where I did get a lot of support from my colleagues. And then I got into some angel groups. And then I also had support from TEDCO, which is Maryland State-Based Venture Fund. So I do encourage people when they're early on looking for this, look at angel groups, look at what your state and your local opportunities might be both for grants as well as investment. And it will slowly build. And so we did that. And I think that first capital was always like the hardest to raise because you don't have anything, right? Like it's an idea that they're investing in. And a lot of times they're investing in me, the founder, right? Like a lot of people tell me early investing, they're really best, they're betting on the jockey and not so much the horse. Like they might think your device is great or your idea is great, but they really feel like Dr. Liz is going to make this happen. And like, I believe in her and I believe in this idea. And that's really what you have to be able to clearly articulate and communicate energetically in addition to like all the information that you're, presenting so that they believe in you and can support you because it is the highest risk investment when it's early on. Now, that said, I'm hoping all my super early investors are also going to make out very pretty, right? When I have this large exit down the line and that's the payoff, right? Is they invest early, but they take the biggest risk. They also get the biggest payout. So after doing those convertible notes, I went on and I'm now currently wrapping up my seed raise, which is a $4 million raise. We have just about 400,000 left in it. But it's been long. It's been taking us like 2 years to raise this. And for all the reasons that I mentioned. And one of the statistics I always, call out to illustrate how difficult it is to raise for my demographic is that a white male founder on average has to speak to about 7 contacts to get like a yes or a return on investment, where a Black female founder has to speak to 10 times that amount, 70 people to get 1 yes. So you do have to have tough skin. You really have to believe in yourself. You have to understand that when someone says no to you, that it's not necessarily a reflection on you or necessarily your technology. It might just be not a good fit for them and you need to just keep moving forward. But it's by no means easy. And it's by no means a way to make quick money. So I do make that really clear to people. That said, I will say that like I've really learned a lot from my journey of fundraising and it's doubled down my belief in myself. And I just continue to like build on like how successful I think I can be. I did maintain, by the way, my clinical like work through this whole process. I still work about 3 to 4 shifts a month. And that was important to me because, I love emergency medicine. I love it even more, by the way, when I only work, 3 to 4 times a month, let me tell you. But outside of that, I think that, it keeps me grounded, it keeps me humble, and it keeps flowing ideas. So we now have pipeline technology where we initially designed the device to carry medications that were helpful in the setting of nosebleeds, like hemostatic or vasoconstrictive agents. But I was like, what if this is actually better at deploying any intranasal net? And the first one I thought of was naloxone or Narcan, because I knew a lot of our patients were getting redosed a lot by fire, police, EMS, or bystanders. And I thought it was because like the sprays, they dissipate. I don't think they get like fully absorbed. Half the medicine can go into the posterior pharynx or the airways. And so I was like, well, instead of doing the spray, if they apply it with the Nasaclip, where a sponge is maintaining contact with the nasal mucosa, and then you put the whole system under pressure with the device, you'll have more absorption of that medication over time and more likely to be effective in one application. So I've now have patents that are covering that technology. We're looking at some NIH funding that's going to like look at modifying the device for intranasal drug delivery. And more importantly, this opens us up to the $43 billion intranasal drug delivery market, because now we're not just talking about Narcan, but benzodiazepines, migraine, allergy. I mean, we even deploy vaccines intranasally. And so this really does put me on a path where I can have a $1 billion+ exit. And I think that really came from, keeping my mind live with that clinical work. And I think emergency medicine in particular, it's really easy to do that because we have shift work. So it's another thing that I encourage people to do.
That's all amazing. And I definitely love the end too of like you've kind of created now like almost like an ecosystem within itself, right? Obviously nasal clip was tackling one issue, but now you kind of like open up a whole market of just one design that can open up a lot of different doors and opportunities. And I think that's absolutely amazing. I think the other thing I think about as well for you is since being on your fundraising journey, I think how have you been able to kind of circumvent a lot of the barriers that you mentioned? Like you unfortunately have to do more conversations compared to like your white counterparts. How have you been kind of like navigating that journey to obviously raise the money that you've been going for?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has not been easy. I think that the other thing that we need to do in medicine in general is like you got to have balance in your life. Like I tell this to my residents all the time. Like I think a lot of times in medicine we try to do this like delayed gratification where it's like, okay, I will relax when, like when I'm done with this shelf exam in medical school, when I'm done with my boards, when when I have my academic paper published, like that goalpost will constantly move and you'll just never have balance in your life. And so especially in the startup world, like I had to just make sure that I was, still enjoying life and still like I have two, small children. I actually went through a divorce while building this company. So I was dealing with all types of like life is lifing situations while this was going on. And for me, it was just building up the community around me. So there's a lot of respite I take in my community of fellow founders, especially like other minority female founders or physician innovators. There's a small pocket of us that are emergency medicine innovators, and I love them, like because they really understand where I'm coming from. And then having mentorship, I think, is another big thing. The other thing I did is just have better control of our schedule. I think one of the things in emergency medicine that gets super out of whack because we work these crazy shifts is there's no container of protected time because you might work in the day, the evening, the night, the weekend, like your whole calendar seems like it can be encroached upon. And that's kind of a little bit of our lifestyle. But when I got into this business, I read a really great book by Wayne Mueller called Sabbath. It's about like the disease of busyness that we have in society. And it was really influential for me because I realized like I didn't have protected time anywhere on my calendar because I would have to work a lot of weekend shifts because I was trying to do company stuff during the week. And then I was a mom and like there's just no protected space. So Mondays, which I strategically picked, as you might guess, because Monday's the worst day in the ER. I don't work on Mondays. I don't take meetings on Mondays. I will sometimes try not to even look at my work email on Mondays. I don't clinically work on Mondays unless it's like a small request that somebody might have for me. I really try to protect at least a half day or full day on Mondays, and I think that that's been really helpful in kind of establishing that balance that's needed, especially while you're fundraising. Because the other thing that will likely happen while you're kind of building a company is that you're going to take a pay cut because you can't pay yourself the same that you would as a clinician as a CEO until your company is like making enough revenue to pay you for that. So it is a financial sacrifice that you take personally, in addition to like the whole risk with the company as you're trying to fundraise. But I do think it's important to pay yourself. I know that there's some people who are in a position where they don't have to pay yourself. That's not a position I'm in. I'm a single mom. Like I got bills to pay. Um, and so I, have been okay making less and making it through because like obviously the dividends in the end are, very promising and I believe that we will get there. But it's definitely an arduous road. And in order to navigate that, you got to have some balance in your lifestyle, your schedule, making sure that you're nourishing yourself along the way.
That's great. And I agree. I think balance is something that we're always trying to find, but I think it's just something that you just have to make it a priority as part of your life and whatever the priorities are for you. And I think it's just something that I think, especially with me as a resident, sometimes you just neglect and put on the back burner. But I think once again, especially conversations around burnout is important for us in emergency medicine, right? It's always in like
Hmm.
the top five,
Yeah,
specialties that are
55%
burned out.
since COVID. And I
Yeah,
mean, it's real. I
it's
will
real.
say that I think innovation and entrepreneurship is a perfect way to build a multifaceted career, a hybrid career. Like I love what you're doing, Daniela, with, the podcast and everything that you're looking to. I don't think that there is a future in emergency medicine where you can just be a clinical workhorse for 30 years plus. Like it just doesn't happen anymore. I think residents recognize that a lot early out. I see a lot of residents coming in at reduced full-time contracts because they don't even like working full-time out of residency. And I don't blame them. I think that the game has changed and that you're more likely to have longevity in your career if it can be more balanced. And one of the ways you can balance that is by doing something else on the side that kind of nourishes you in a different way and brings in income from a different source. So I actually have been really trying to get on both the School of Medicine and our residency to have more curriculum about innovation and entrepreneurship because a lot of times it is people in training that think about things differently and want to solve problems in unique ways. But we got to make sure that we're like encouraging, that inspiration and nurturing it so that it can come to fruition. So I try to share my story a lot because I think I stumbled through a lot of things, but it would be great if it was like we were structuring our future, physicians, especially in emergency medicine, where we see like, the whole breadth of problems, both in the healthcare system as well as on the patient level. Um, and asking for solutions that come out of these bright minds that then lead to a career that can be, really satisfying on multiple levels.
What do you think are the barriers for physicians turning into the innovation and entrepreneurship side? Because as you mentioned, I think physicians are in a very unique circumstance where you take care of patients, right? And we see our broken healthcare system. We see so many things. Obviously, in emergency medicine in particular, you're taking care of everybody who goes to that door. And I think there's a lot of change that can happen based on our experiences. But why do you think a lot of physicians just don't take that jump?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in general, medicine historically has been very hierarchical, very traditional, and so those structures tend to not like change and don't like things that are different. So we're not really trained to think outside the box that much, and then it's almost discouraged because it seems unsafe. Or maybe not even popular or respected, right? There's a part of me that's like, oh, I'm gonna like leave my academic trajectory to do something that's not as quote unquote respected. And I think that that's a misnomer. If you ask anyone, like I get more praise now. Like I walk around ASAP and feel like pseudo famous because they're like, it's Liz with Nasaclip. We're like so excited for you. Like keep going. And it's because I took this risk. And I think so. I think part of it is the culture, but I think it's also we don't have any tools, right? You're talking about like we don't have the mentorship, we don't have structure. People just don't know how to take that risk, even if they wanted to do it. So I do think some of it needs to come from our educational institutions and like providing better actual curriculum, resources that encourage innovation, like as more of a standard curriculum. And then I think also, our culture needs to change into supporting careers and supporting physicians that want to pursue this because obviously it benefits everybody. I mean, there are amazing, amazing technologies that are in pipeline that really come from people who decided to take this risk. And as you said, we have like the most intimate knowledge of patient care and our healthcare system to really have a meaningful impact, not just in this country, but globally.
It's amazing. I think the other thing too, Dr. Clayborne, is the distribution size with Nasaclip. How has that journey been for you? Especially as you mentioned too, like you're like Amazon, you obviously have the direct
Yeah.
consumer on the website. How has that been for you?
Yeah, the B2B side, especially in medical, is challenging. Let me tell you. So, like, shout out to anybody who wants Nasaclip in their facility. Please, please, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. My email is eclayborne, Clayborne, at nasaclip, nasaclip.com. And I will have my team, quick, fast, and in a hurry, help to get Nasaclip into your institutions. Ironically, I think the same issues exist with like healthcare institutions not wanting to change quickly. It is really hard to get new product introductions into some of these systems. Usually we have to go through a process called value analysis where like a committee like vets the value add, which I've talked about, like, the reduced length of stay for the patient. It costs less than nasal tamponade devices, use less of the doc's time. The patient can get treatment initiated quickly. All of these things get evaluated by the hospital, but then sometimes they want to do a trial. These things drag out. Like my average right now is I'm spending like, close to 9 months to almost a year converting some of these hospitals from like my initial conversation to having them actually stock the device. Now, I will say it's picking up as we're growing in reputation. And then we also have brought on some distributors, like we have Henry Schein, Owens and Minor, a couple of other government distributors in the VA space. We use Marathon Medical. So that sometimes gives those hospitals that contract with them an easy button to order. But a lot of times I still am working to just make sure everyone is aware that Nasaclip exists and that they can have it in their ED and all the great things it provides. I mean, for now, the word of mouth is really helpful, which is why I'm excited to be on this podcast. And hopefully everyone who hears me is like, yes, like we need to get Nasaclip in our EDs and we're going to help, Dr. Clayborne fulfill this goal of getting them in all the hospitals nationally. But it's a slow and arduous process. Really, because those systems are slower. The consumer side is obviously faster, right? Like that's why we've had a little bit more of a focus this year on traction in our consumer market. I also think we've underestimated the demand for the everyday parent or caregiver who wants to have like Nasaclip in their first aid kit, or coaches, trainers. We also run all Disney cruise ships and parks, so we do a lot of travel and event medicine. If you think of any extreme elevation areas, geography where it's very arid, I'm originally from Denver, Colorado. People get nosebleeds there all the time. There's just a wealth of opportunities when it comes to distribution. So part of my challenge is actually not being a squirrel that's like following every shiny object in front of me. Our bread and butter has been ER urgent care, and that's like initially what I designed the device for. So I am really pushing through that. But since that sales cycle is really slow, it's nice that we're supplementing in these other areas that move a lot more quickly.
Absolutely amazing. And I'm excited to see kind of like how Nasaclip kind of evolves over time. And like, as you mentioned too, like the other devices that you're going to be having as well. With that being said, Dr. Clayborne, where can people find you? Where can people find Nasaclip and connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm on all social platforms. My personal handle is at Dr. Eliz PC, so DrEliz PC. You could also follow us on at Nasaclip, Nasaclip. I'm also on LinkedIn. I've already shared my email. I definitely encourage you guys to go to nasaclip.com. You can see our how-to video, which features my two cute kids. Ironically, my Corona baby, my 2020 baby, is a redhead. She's cute as a button, but she gets nosebleeds all the time. Like my mom told me redheads get nosebleeds. She's a redhead as well. That they have a propensity for having more nosebleeds. So it's so ironic because, I had came up with the idea before she was born. And so it's funny to me that now I'm a parent of like a chronic nosebleeder, but you'll see her in there and she's great. She's 5 now. She can like put the device on herself. She takes it to school and she's like, Mommy, like so-and-so had a nosebleed today and I gave him a Nasaclip. And so, she's my Nasaclip evangelist, but like you can check us out on that website. And, I do quite a few podcasts. So if you go to LinkedIn, follow me there. I will have a personal site that's going to be opening soon. It's doclizmd.com, since I have been doing a lot more public speaking. And I just really encourage everyone that's listening to this podcast and like interested in these topics, like make sure you're sharing your story, like let your light shine. You never know like who's going to talk to who, what introduction that might lead to you, or who will be inspired by your story. And that's really what I'm trying to do, is like lead by example. I think that in particular, we have such amazing, brilliant, genuine, and caring minds that come out of medicine, and particularly emergency medicine. And I'd really like us to use that skill set and those, that character in other domains of our society besides just patient, care. So if you have an idea and you don't know what to do with it, I'm happy to, personally talk to you, share resources. I think this is something where everyone can win if we, shine each other's light and lift each other up along the way.
I absolutely love it. And once again, for everybody who's listening to this podcast, like I said, Dr. Claiborne has been dropping gems left and right. And once again, it kind of goes to show you as well too, like you could do this if you really want to as a physician, and you don't have to have limitations against you. So with that, Dr. Claiborne, I want to say thank you so much again for being a part of the Resident Founder podcast. And I'll make sure to have all the links for yourself as well as Nasal Clip also in the description, and also posted everywhere for people to find you.